Good evening, members. Welcome to this festive edition of Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee, Monday the 18th of December 2017. Before we start the agenda, I would take this opportunity to advise you that if a fire alarm does sound, please remain seated to enable ESI to assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but to merely ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know what is taking place. Thank you very much. First item is Chairman's updates, and I've got one for you. It was really interesting and exciting to see on Saturday just gone the first live nativity in Maidstone in the town centre. I don't know whether people come along to see that, but it was certainly a very cold day, as Councillor Nagy will probably testify. But it was a very good presentation, and so far I've spoken to officers and there was no reported problems, and people were fascinated by the donkey and the camel. So it seems it went down very well. So that was the first for Maidstone. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies received from Councillor Hastie and Councillor Mrs Hinder, and apologies for lateness have been received from Councillor Ells. Notification of substitute members. Are there any substitute members? Councillor Nagy?
Councillor Nagy for Councillor Hastie.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bolton?
Councillor Bolton for Councillor Hinder.
Thanks very much. Agenda item 3, urgent items. There are no urgent items this evening, members. Agenda item 4, notification of visiting members. I don't see any visiting members, to be honest. Thank you very much. Agenda item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members or officers? Thank you very much. Agenda item 6, disclosures of lobbying. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? Thank you. Agenda item 7, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. As we have no part 2 items on the agenda, members, this evening I propose that we take all items in public. Is this agreed? Thank you, members. Agenda item 9. No, sorry, I missed agenda item 8. Minutes of the meeting held on 28th of November 2017, pages 1 to 5, and I will take these page by page. Page 1. Thank you. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Thank you very much. I just will indicate that hopefully we all received the follow-ups on those 2 questions that were on that. We all did receive those. Thank you very much. Agenda item, 9, presentations of petitions. There are no petitions this evening. Agenda item 10, question and answer sessions from members of the public. There are no questions from members of the public, members. Agenda item 11 on page 6, committee work programme. Are there any comments, members, on the work programme? Councillor Wilson.
Can I just make a small point that at P&R we asked that the items should be numbered, and I was told that for every committee they would now be numbered. It's just that it's easier if somebody wants to refer to something that they can say it's 3 or 5 or whatever it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. The work programme you see before you, just to advise you that the museum future governance options that was due to come on the 30th of January 18 will now come in March, our March meeting. Any more questions on work programme? Thank you.
If it's coming to our last meet, if that's coming to our last meeting, it means that it's likely that anything significant to do with it will knock over into the next year and could be a different committee. I'm a little bit concerned it's that late, the museum. I am a little bit concerned. But if it has to be, it has to be.
Yeah, I can understand that, Councillor Wilson, your concern. Obviously, we don't have a February meeting, which means it does have to go into March. And we do have an April meeting, I'm advised. Are we all agreed on the work programme, members? Thank you very much. Move on to the first of our two items this evening, members. Agenda item 12, Festival and Events Strategic Update. I've got my teeth in. The recommendation on page 7. Mrs. Laura Dixon, the MCL Marketing and Sales Manager, will present this item to the committee.
This report is really about the two events that the Council supports financially and with officer time. The decision to be made is whether proms becomes a paid-for event or is no longer supported. The report also provides an overview of the other events held on Council land. Proms is funded by the Council and is run by Parkwood Leisure, who are given £14,000 to run the event. There's been no increase in previous budget, although the cost of running this event increases each year. The figure does not include marketing or officer time for the event. In 2016-17, Council agreed a budget saving over 3 years for events of £10,000 per year for 3 years. Last year, the HCL committee agreed the new plan for the multicultural event. This event was outsourced to an external provider and will become self-funding in 3 years. The committee was asked in 2016 to introduce ticketing as a way of supporting proms. The decision last year was to delay the decision on the introduction of ticketing for 12 months. Investigations into future sponsorship of the event have not been successful. The event is regarded as too short in length with a small and unguaranteed audience and is therefore not considered to be a viable proposition for potential sponsors. Sponsorship is not a donation, and the sponsors require a return on investment that proms cannot offer in its present format. And there is no longer a staff resource to pursue this further at this time. Around 1,500 to 2,000 people attend proms each year. Based on the survey in 2016, 28% are visitors, 13% have a member of the family or a friend taking part. The cost to run the event works out at between £7 and £10 per person, depending on whether this is calculated on 1,500 or 2,000 people, and includes children. In the report, it is suggested that it will run on the same day as the royal wedding. However, that date has now been released as taking place a week before proms. It could still be possible to share the date with another paying event to share the costs. There is a risk to introducing ticketing, but that risk is lessened while there is still some core funding for proms in 2018. The report also mentions the other council event, the Multicultural Festival, Shimamajamo. Around 9,000 people visited that event over the 3 days. This was the first year, so there were many lessons to be learned. The debrief has picked up a number of operational changes that will be introduced next year, including changes to layout, signage and marketing. In essence, though, the contract is working and it will be self-financing by the end of year 3. The economic impact for that event is estimated at just under £300,000. There were many large events throughout the borough, notably at the County Showground in Leeds Castle. However, this report reviews a few large events that took place on council land. These include the Big Day Out, Rambling Man and Oktoberfest. The combined economic impact of these events is estimated at over 4.6 million. It's not unreasonable to suggest that, combined with the other major events that have an impact in the borough at the County Showground and Leeds Castle, Headcorn Aerodrome, the Hop Farm, that the direct economic impact for events is in excess of £10 million. The Big Day Out was a one-day family music festival with acts such as Diversity and Louisa Johnson. It is estimated alone to bring in around 700,000 to the local economy. The Community Mela, which I hadn't mentioned before, was organised by Cohesion Plus in Watman Park. The Council supported this event through provision of Watman Park and marketing support. Rambling Man, this was the second year for it to be run by Spirit of Rock and included additional performances on the Friday evening, specifically for the campers and glampers. Visitors from all over the world came to the event, and the value of the event is conservatively estimated at over 2.8 million. Oktoberfest was a new German beer festival, and these are very popular around the country at the moment. Over 9,000 people enjoyed the event over the 2 days, with the average age of the ticket holders at 35. Lots of older family groups and a lot of lederhosen. The economic impact is estimated at just under £800,000. However, today the decision for committee is about proms. There are two options. One, that proms will become a paid-through event through ticket sales and other commercial activities. And secondly, or otherwise, proms in the park will no longer be supported by MBC.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, the Chairman, Councillor Owls, has entered the chamber. Do you have any disclosures, Councillor Owls?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. First, apologies for arriving somewhat late and somewhat dishevelled. Yes, for the declarations somewhere, I was given weekend VIP tickets for the Rambling Man Fair. Complimentary tickets, that is. So I want to declare that at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For clarity, I think what we would do is take questions on proms in the park first, and any other questions from the rest of the events. So, can we take questions for proms in the park?
Hi, thank you for the report.
Louise.
Hello. I think it would be a good idea to expand perhaps on the proms in the park and also to make it a ticketed event, quite, £5 to £7 perhaps, but also so that facilities can be expanded and provided so that people will see where their money's going, and it will be more comfortable perhaps if there's toilets provided and silly little things like that that aren't really silly but make the night, the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Nagy, did you want to, you were trying to come in there?
Just, I've already declared that I went to Rambling Man with the council, so I just thought I'd better mention it as we mentioned it at the meeting.
I think as long as you reported it to the right sector, that's the main thing. Councillor Wilson.
I've got a few questions, actually. Having read the papers, I'd like to ask you what sort of level you think you would want to issue the tickets at. My maths is not the best in the world, but if I look at the responses and look at what they say they would pay, most of them say they wouldn't pay more than £5, and you'd still therefore have a shortfall on the numbers that currently attend. And whenever you charge for anything, numbers drop initially, if not long term. So that's a little bit of concern to me. I'd like to know a bit more about that. I want to come back to the issue of fireworks. I know it's a very delicate topic, but and I understand absolutely why we stopped, because we hold this event in nesting season, which means that we can't have fireworks because it actually means it's against a national directive. So, but I think if you package something as proms in the park, people expect fireworks because that is, so you'd have to rebrand it if you're going to keep it at the same time and not call it that. And the other question I want to ask is how much research we've done at other places and how they manage to do things. I would be very, very interested in having the person who runs the proms in Medway to come and talk to us. I know they're much bigger. I know we're not exactly a comparator, but I understand they have one staff member who actually does that. And I'd be very interested to hear how they organise and how they do things, because I'm wondering if long-term there's some merit in trying to partner with another council for eventing. I just feel that it might be something that might be to everybody's advantage. You know, at the moment we get clashes of events. There's all sorts of things around it. So I'm not going to oppose. I think the way forward is to charge. But at this point in time, I want to know what we'd be charging for. In other words, you know, what actually is the offer we're going to give, and how do we actually get the numbers up to cover it, and at what level. So I would like to pick other people's brains if you haven't already done so, and if you have done so, I'd like to hear what you found out. So I support charging, but it's got so many caveats around it at the moment that I'm a little bit dubious about making a definite opinion until I know a bit more about what it would be for.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Laura, do you want to come back on those?
Going on the survey and the conversations we had with people 2 years ago, going for the lower level, it was fairly obvious people do not want to go for a higher level and say they'll pay more when they're going to pay less. So, I mean, that was quite anticipated to a certain extent. There were people who did say that they would be willingly pay more if there were fireworks as well. That was obviously for a part of the audience important, but actually for a large part it wasn't that important. It was about the music. What that would cover at the moment, if we introduced a low fee to start with, while we still have some core budget, it would allow us to test the water, but also make it fairly safe in the first year to try it out. So a fee between £5–7 would possibly be good. Bearing in mind that most ticketed events anywhere, including at the Hazlitt, are upward of £12–15 for a programme for one event, it's not a huge amount to charge. What it does cover and what they get for the money is really the most of the money actually goes towards the performances and the additional entertainment. Obviously there are some infrastructure charges and the marquees, staffing, security, toilets, lighting, sound systems. There's a number of things that covers, but the biggest fees obviously go for the actual performers themselves. However, some of the community acts that have taken part do it willingly and freely, just some of their costs covered. But unfortunately, it doesn't go very far. And should we to do fireworks, that was an issue that was coming up already. We didn't actually have enough budget anymore because the costs were escalating, you know, to actually do fireworks, because once fireworks are introduced, there's additional costs that come in with barriers and safety and fire. It's not just the cost of the fireworks themselves. Yes, we'd be happy to look at what other authorities are doing, bearing in mind Medway have an enormous events budget and have a team of people that actually put on events. They have a bigger team, they have more people, but they run a number of events and a big budget with it, yes.
Councillor Ford.
I think the problem you have is this date, because obviously you've got the Royal Wedding, and I understand the FA Cup final, and even Buckingham Palace said they had an own goal. So I just think to have a ticketed event on that day, I don't think you're going to sell very many.
I think the date, it's possible to look at the date. It's historically, you know, for the number of years Proms has run, it's always been on the bank holiday weekend. So, yeah, it's an interesting idea.
On that...
So the date of the royal wedding has changed. They don't clash anymore. No, the provisional date that was put out was thought to be this back.
The royal wedding's the week before. Yeah, the royal wedding, it was announced on Friday as being the weekend before when proms would now sit.
I think we can talk about the date a little. I think we need to progress on what we're doing so far. Sorry. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. My concern is if you're going to introduce tickets, you're going to need extra manning and what have you. How much would that cost?
Well, the ticketing would obviously, we're already using Parkwood Leisure to run the event, who run the Hazlitt Theatre. So the ticketing could be purchased in advance using the Hazlitt system. There would probably have to be an administration fee, a booking fee on top of tickets, as is with any event, to cover that additional cost. When we did the open-air cinema in Watman Park and we had tickets and we did sell on the day, the additional staff was down to officers to undertake that, and it worked fairly successfully.
Councillor Ells, did you indicate?
I didn't, Chairman, actually, but as I've got a turn anyway, I think mostly what I was going to say has already been said by Councillor Fort and Councillor Mrs Wilson. To be honest, I was concerned about the date. I didn't realise they're now a week apart. Still a little concerned about the football. To my mind, if we're clashing with something major, the problem with the public is they don't see the entry charge as something we've got to do because we don't have a budget. I think they're going to see it as Maidstone Borough Council had a look at this event, have seen hundreds of people going to it and thought, that's a great idea, we'll make another amount of money out of it. Unfortunately, I seem to find that that's what people, it's not true, but it's what people tend to think. So that's why I was a bit concerned about everything else. I thought if they'd got a royal wedding and a football match, and the mayor making in the town and charging, it's all rather a lot. But at least the royal wedding's off to one side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the date is obviously going to be crucial with this before we make decisions. But Councillor Borden.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. And of course, the FA Cup final is on the 19th, so it's not on the date of Promising Park, but the Champions League final is on the 26th, as far as I'm aware, which is obviously could be very important. To move things on, Mr Chairman, I do think, in summary, if the council is to continue to support events such as this, then I think it's going to have to be sort of a paid-for events, to be totally honest. So, looking at the recommendations we've got on the paper, I'd be quite happy to move what we've got in front of us. In terms of sort of more specific issues, such as whether there's fireworks or not, the issues that Councillor Butler's raised about sort of how the logistics of that, I think it's not necessarily the best way for us to do things here and now as a HCL committee to sort of decide these matters. They're going to need sort of detailed evaluation, really, which we don't have in the report in front of us. So I do think perhaps we can maybe sort of add something onto the recommendations, to perhaps get yourself as the chairman and the vice chairman of this committee involved in those details, because it is an important thing. But I'd be happy to move the recommendations as on the papers.
Thank you very much. Do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Earls.
Thank you, Chairman. Just something I've just thought of. I'm happy to second that, and I'm happy that I think we go ahead with that. One thing, though, following on from the Moat Park paying machines, if this becomes a success, and hopefully it will, and actually generates money, are we going to see the income coming back to the parks, to Watman Park, to here, in some sort of ring fencing, or is it going to go somewhere else? Thank you.
Very good question. It's unlikely that this event would ever return a surplus, because I think if we could get the ticket prices to a level that exceeded the current costs, we would be improving the event and adding additionality to it, investing that money back into the event itself to improve it and grow it.
Move to the vote, but if you want to quickly come in there. Councillor Nagy.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. What I was confused is the executive summary. It says a reduction of council funding for mixed run events, 30 grand to 2016, and then there's a budget saving over 3 years. And then we've got this little bit put in that whatever that event's called, Shamundi or whatever, has a 3-year plan for the event to become self-financing, which sort of contradicts the previous few words, I thought, because obviously we must be funding that to the tune of something or other, and probably put a large amount. I know it's the aim is to become self-financing, but it was a bit strange to have agree a 3-year saving, then have that event plan put back in, and then it goes on that the promise is to continue. I thought that doesn't quite read right there. We're going to save money, then we've got a new event which is coming in which we're having to pay for. That doesn't seem right there. And of course, we don't know where we are in the funding of that because we've still got another year or so ago. What other things I picked up on? Wasn't Rambling, because I know it keeps saying Maidstone Borough Council money, but I see on the literature that Rambling Man was contributing to both the events, Proms in the Park and whatever the word. Can we have the right word? Yeah, Shemanja Mudra helped. And of course, what we're doing then, what we seem to be doing, is it gives the impression that this is all Maidstone Borough Council money, but obviously we are raising money from other events and fundraisers. So I'm surprised that we haven't looked at another way of funding this. Perhaps, I don't know if what Rambling Man are doing this year or other people, but this seems like it calls out for someone to sponsor it. And I'm surprised it's just come here to be yes or no tickets or we don't do it. But I know that other events put money into the events last year. So I just got those questions queried, please.
Thank you, Chair. On the first one, around the budget saving, so what was agreed through the budget setting process last year, there would be a reduction in the festivals and events budget of £30,000 over 3 years. So £10,000 a year deduction starting in 2018-19. Which basically means £5,000 off the Shemama Jamo budget and £5,000 off the Proms in the Park budget, until both of those budgets end up after 3 years as being zero. So we've got a solution with Shemam because the business case for that, we reduced their funding over 3 years and it's self-sustaining and may even return a small surplus to the council at the end of the 3 years if the event grows in the way we hope it will. With the Proms, as Laura's already explained, I've found it really difficult to try and find sponsors because of the nature, the length and the size of the event. However, we have been successful with the organisers of the Shemama Jamo event in having a contribution from them towards council funding events last year. We have no guarantee Rambling Man, we have no guarantee that we will get that next year. That was a deal done as part of their contract for last year, and there isn't a guarantee that we'll get it. If we do, then we'll be able to enhance the event, and it will help us sustain it for another year, but it's not sustainable going forward more than that.
Yeah, I was just picking up that fact that we agreed a 3 years of savings over 3 years, and then this year we started a new event, which obviously we had to put money into. Is that how it works? Have I got that right, or am I misunderstanding that?
So Shemam wasn't a new event, it was a replacement event for something that we'd previously funded, which was the Mela. So the budget already existed, and this committee made a decision to commission a new multicultural food and drink festival using that budget. That's what we did.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Well, I must say that I think the majority of councillors believed that the deal done with whichever one it was, whichever one, was that they made a contribution every year. So if that's not the case, and it was only done for 1 year, I think I'd like to actually see those papers and that agreement, because I do think councillors generally thought that it was as part of what they did and as part of what they were given, that every year they were making a contribution. That's my first thing. So I'm not disbelieving you, except I'm saying I think we had a different opinion, so we just need that very carefully checked. But my main issue here, and because I do want to move to the vote, I don't want to keep making this go on, but I don't want an agreement that the Proms in the Park becomes a paid event through ticket sales and other commercial activities to therefore be taken away and become something done just purely on delegated powers, and we never get it back. I think that this is so important that when you've got a good idea of the level you're going to charge and what sort of commercial activities, I think we would like to have a look at that. And may I make a plea that we have a family ticket, whatever we do? Because one of the things about Proms in the Park is that families come to it. And if you, having in view of what I've just said about O2 in the summer, where there's no child ticket, where there's no family ticket, I just think that, you know, this is to try and encourage even the poorest people to come. And so we've got to find a hook that at least you have a family ticket or something like that. But I'm happy to go with the recommendation.
Just on the first issue, we've had a change of organiser with Rambling Man. In the first year, people might remember that they did a community fund and they offered grants to community groups. That proved really difficult to administer and manage. And so when we got the deal with the new company, they offered to support Maystone Council events instead. They have a year-on-year contract, so we haven't negotiated a contract going forward. It's renegotiated each year, and we will do our level best to get as good, if not better, deal next year. On the second point about coming back to committee, I have a concern in terms of the fact we've got to start planning this now for May, and we wouldn't, I don't think, be in a position to bring back a report in January, and in March would be too late. So can I suggest that we do what Councillor Borton suggested, was do it in conjunction with the Chair and Vice Chair?
Yeah, I don't want it to come back so we pick and chew and discuss the whole thing. I just want to know that what we are asking for is what we actually get. And that's what concerns me all the time. That if we don't have a chance to get an idea of which way your thoughts are going, because as you look at things, it can change, then it's a bit late in the day if it's set in stone and we're stuffed, basically. I think you have got to do it now, but, you know, it would be good to know what sort of level you do come in at. And the other thing is, there's no point trying a new system on a year when you won't be able to tell whether it works or not because of the conflicting events. And that's another issue. So you're going to have to bulletproof yourself against that.
Just on one point, one of the things when we were looking at it when the ticket charging was only for adults, there was not going to be any charge for children. It was based on adults only, was our remit. The idea, I think, this year is to try and keep the structure of the event very much as it is, but possibly add to it with other activities that might help supplement the income by extending it and allowing income from concessions by having a longer event. So we're not looking to sort of drastically change anything this year. We're just trying to support it and give it opportunity to grow.
Thank you, members. Before we move to the, I just want to say that I think we can trust, hopefully, our officers to come up with a plan for the Proms in the Park going forward with all the things that need to be put in place. So if we're quite happy, I think I'm going to move to the vote on the recommendation. Unless, Councillor Bolton, you want to...
I do sympathise. Actually, I agree with what Councillor Wilson says. And what basically we're trying to get at here, I think both of us, is basically for as much member involvement as possible bearing in mind that, as I always say, it's going to be our heads on the block if it all goes pear-shaped, as we're sort of the public-facing sort of folk in the council. So I appreciate what Mr Sudd says about it being too early, it can't come back in January, but too late perhaps to come back in March. But I do, it might even need us to meet in February of this committee or something, in order to get this to get this ratified. I did float the idea, obviously, of yourself, Mr Chairman, and the Vice Chairman, sort of having the sort of a sort of working group, but I think most members would prefer it to come back to the full committee, and in that case, I think I'd be happy to put that on as an additional recommendation. The logistics of how that happened would have to be sort of worked out, I think, at a later date, but ultimately we're here to make a decision on the report we've got in front of us at the moment, and I would be happy to amend it to add a second recommendation for it to come back to this committee, when that would be perhaps a discussion for another day.
Thank you, Chair. As Laura's just said, we're not looking to change anything at all drastically for 2018. We would keep a very similar format event. So the only thing that would change would be the introduction of a minimum ticketing price for this year. The clashes of dates aren't as bad as we thought, because it doesn't clash with the Royal Wedding and the FA Cup, so it is a different weekend. I am concerned that if we need to come back with a report that needs a decision, then we will be too late in the process to implement what we want to do, because we'll have had to work with the Hazlitt to organise and book the event.
Can I just come back very quickly? Nowhere in the report did it actually say that you were thinking that children should be free. To what age are you considering that? My goodness. Well, I do consider that to be extremely generous, actually, but that's good. So, as there's nothing in the report, what I'm trying to bottom out is that I don't want to find charges that all of us would disagree with, which is why I said a family ticket. But if you're saying children free, you don't need a family ticket. So, with Councillor Borton's agreement, I think we should add a second recommendation, which actually puts that in there, that we support the idea of children to 16 being free. So if we put so you've got a clear directive, and then because I think that is the crunch line, isn't it? And is there anything else that members would definitely want to add in as a clear sort of steer for officers? Like a range? Is it up to £7 and up between £5 and £7, something like that? Would that suit you? And an entry fee for adults between 5 and or no greater than 7.
Councillor Budge, you wish to come in?
Pressing the wrong thing. I mean, with the children being free, then I would want it to be no more than £10.
Members, I have to say, I think we're getting bogged down in trying to organise a proms in the park off the hoof here. I think we need to... I'm going to propose... Sorry, I think we will add that recommendation in, which we will get some words for. But I do feel that we need to have a steering group, and I'm proposing myself and the Vice Chair to look at this. Because, to be honest, we can't just do an event tonight. Going into great details, but obviously what's been said will be taken on board, and obviously if we have a steering group we can actually look at it and see where we're actually going to go.
Mr Chairman, does that in effect make 3 recommendations then? Obviously the first one, which is as on the papers, the second one perhaps that this committee supports the idea of children up to the age of 16 being able to enter free of charge, and the third recommendation that a steering group be formed of the Chairman, the Vice Chairman and the relevant officers, or whatever the wording is, to talk through the finer detail of how this is implemented.
I quite agree. Okay, members, we'll take the first vote first, because obviously that's already on your papers. I'll just allow Izzy to produce the other two. Yeah? Take them all together. Are we happy to take those all together? I can read them all out if you wish. Are you all happy? No. You're all happy. Okay. Okay. So, okay, taking 1, 2 and 3 recommendations all together, can we please vote on that? Four recommendations. That's unanimous, members. Thank you very much. Thank you, members. We move on to agenda item 13, the commemorative plaque scheme, and recommendations on page 15 of your papers. Ms. Orla Sweeney, the Equalities and Corporate Policy Officer, will present this item to the committee.
Good evening, members. Past and present members of the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee have felt for some time that there should be a scheme or mechanism in place that enables Maidstone's rich local heritage and historic environment to be celebrated. Whilst there are organisations such as English Heritage and Open Plaques who provide guidance on bringing commemorative plaques forward, like the recent David Bowie Blue Plaque Memorial in the Royal Star Arcade, successful schemes tend to have an individual identity and a more local ownership. This evening's report brings together the original ideas and impetus that came from members of this committee. Extensive research has been undertaken into best practice across the country, as well as consideration given to English heritage guidance. The design of the plaque, which gives it local significance, was conceived by this committee. This is included as part of the scheme's application form guidance attached as Appendix A to the report. The further detail on the number of words and content comes from English Heritage, which strengthens the design and creates a uniformity going forward. The proposed scheme would be deliverable within current resources. The committee, as advocates of this scheme, will play an invaluable role in evaluating applications. Its involvement will raise the profile of the scheme significantly and contribute to its success. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Just before I take questions, I just want to say that obviously this is, say, 18 months in gestation, I think the word is. I've been coming forward for a while. And I would like to just give credit to certain councillors, some present. I know the committee's taken a great interest in this, and obviously I would just like to say thank you to Councillor Fran Wilson, Councillor Clive English, Councillor Newton, who helped bring this forward, and Orla Sweeney, who has obviously completed the papers for us this evening, members. And I'll take questions. Councillor Fort, I think you were first. Sorry, Councillor Fort, did you wish to?
I'm just querying the fact that they have to, whoever we're commemorating has to be dead for more than 10 years, when there was a big thing on the David Bowie plaque and he's only been dead a year. I just think 10 years is quite a long while to wait.
Thank you. Councillor Earls.
Thank you, Chairman. It's following on a little bit, actually, from that. I think it's a brilliant idea. Fully support the idea, so I've got no problem there. The only thing I'm a bit concerned about is we've got 6 very nice pictures of existing plaques at the top. And as far as I can make out, under the scheme we're proposing, 5 of those would not have been allowed. The David Bowie, or Bowie, he was only here one summer. Edith Cavell, again, was only here one summer. William Hazlitt, he lived near here. There was no association for the building. The Old Bell Inn, Pepys only visited. He didn't stay for 5 years. The Battle of Maidstone ticks the boxes. And William Alexander, again, was near here. There's no association with the building. I'm just a little bit concerned that it might be a bit too rigid. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Baldwin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do share Councillor Ells's concern. Obviously, I can't say to be too sure about the sort of background of this, but if we are to have such a document describing who can and can't and have a plaque and what it should look like, then it seems like the assessment criteria, and if there is some science behind this, please tell me, some of these things seems to have been sort of plucked out of mid-air to an extent. Like, for example, to commemorate an event, the event should have happened at least 25 years ago. Well, to me, that's putting an unnecessary restriction, because there's some events that are worth commemorating that happened less than 25 years ago. Obviously, Councillor Forts raised the issue of David Bowie and not having died 10 years ago as well. So, if we are to have this document, I do agree with Councillor Ells that it's got to be quite loose, I would describe it. It's got to be able to give people who want to put a plaque up the flexibility to, maybe not in design terms, because I think that's the most important thing, but in terms of who they are commemorating and why and what they want to do, the ability to sort of to do so. Are we aiming this at sort of people like David Bowie of national and international importance? Are we aiming this at real sort of good community local heroes who are worthy of a plaque because of something they've done for Maidstone, even if they're not famous, really? And to me, it's slightly confused in reading what we've got on pages 21 and 22 as to who that's being targeted at.
We'll just say from the chair, obviously we did a lot of research on this, and this all came up when the Edith Cavell plaque was brought into being, when we had it was highlighted there was no way of doing things and there was no system for actually doing it and no criteria. So this is a step in the right way of having criteria. Councillor Wilson.
If I can assist a little bit. In actual fact, some of us were quite concerned when the David Bowie thing happened, because it's a blue plaque and we don't have blue plaques, but it's inside a private complex. Even though people can see it, it's inside a private place. We're talking about plaques which we have a range. Let's forget whether they're relevant or not for a minute. We have a range of plaques that are in a Maidstone style, and the thought was that we didn't want to run the risk as the years go by of people whacking up things when they felt like it, whatever they look like, all over the place. And the blue plaque is a really good idea, which we could have followed that, or do we keep with what we've already got? And it seemed like a good idea to say, well, we do have a style of plaque, which is, so let's go with that. There's a very good reason, actually, for having a time limit, because what you or I might think is a really important event that's recent, in hindsight might pale into insignificance, and something we might not have thought about might actually prove to be much more memorable as time goes by. And in fact, I actually think that 5 years is a little bit too short, because it talks about something that is memorable as time goes by. and you need to sort of have like a generation have gone by before you can make that assessment. But I'm not going to argue that point particularly, but where I do take on board the issue is that if you take the Edith Cavell, it's on a building with which she had a clear association, because that's where she actually received her medallion for what she did here in that epidemic. And so I have put in here, so on that, they should be, under the third bullet point, I thought it should be, say, the building, which is just a form of words, the building on which the plaque will be fixed must be directly related to the proposed person, and they must have lived or worked there for at least 5 years, or have had a direct association with the building. So in other words, they don't have to have lived there, they don't have to have worked there, but something about that building must give the direct association, and that would actually cover the plaques that don't fit the bill. So I'm personally not going to argue about the 5 years. I think that's a fairly, all of that was a fairly standard thing that you found, I believe you found. But I do think we need to have that flexibility in where something's put up, so that if you're commemorating an event, you can also have a bit of a choice about where you actually put it as well.
Can I just come in first from the chair? That obviously this document's been designed to give a guide to people applying, and obviously this committee would obviously look at applications case-by-case basis, and obviously if things were different and buildings were concerned, or ages or times, that could be amended. So this is a guide, a mechanism to apply for a plaque. Councillor Ells.
Thank you, Chairman. I really just wanted to say I was agreeing with Councillor Mrs Wilson here, that that's really the part that bothered me, is if you look at the Cavell plaque, and if you took it as rigid, and I'm not saying you were going to, but if you did take it as rigid, she wasn't here for at least 5 years, and therefore that plaque wouldn't have been allowed. But if there is something that can be added to say, or had an important association, etc., that would solve that. Thank you.
Those images are in there for illustrative purposes only, and obviously to illustrate the point, and that there are plaques that exist in this town that aren't linked together, there's no uniformity to them, and to make the point that the committee themselves want to make by formulating this scheme, that that's what you're trying to do. So they are illustrative and they can be removed. They don't need to be in a pictorial in your application form. But also they obviously raise the profile of Mason in the fact that they are on national websites. So I think that's the whole point of the plaque and the scheme in itself.
Councillor Nagy.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm going to propose that we change this name to the Commemorative Plaques Guidance, or Guidelines, because someone will be making a decision on this, and it'll probably be this committee. Am I right? Because no one said about who makes the decision. It will come to HCL, yes? So I'm going to propose that we don't call it a scheme, we call it guidelines, because everyone will look at the guidelines whenever this comes up in the future, and we'll be able to make and whoever's on that committee will make a decision based on those guidelines. So I think calling it a scheme doesn't quite get it right to me. I would like to see it called Commemorative Plaques Guidelines, as you just said, actually.
Just from the chair, I come back on that. If that's what you're suggesting, Councillor Nagy, I would presume we could probably say Commemorative Plaque Guide. Proposed by Councillor Nagy, seconded by Councillor Wilson.
Can I move the recommendation then, a minute, hang on, wherever I've lost it now. Just a minute, I have to go back a few pages. That the introduction of the commemorative plaque guide, so that's be agreed, and I would like the change in wording, so with the amendment to bullet point 3 on page 21, under they should be, that added to that is or have had a direct association with the building. and I move that.
Is that seconded, Councillor Wilson? Councillor Nagy, you seconded, thank you.
I might even be at home in time.
Actually, CL will make the decision, right?
Yes, yes.
Members, are we happy to move to the vote on those recommendations? All in favour? Unanimous, members.
Councillor Bolton didn't vote.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Councillor Bolton, you're not voting. You're, okay. We'll have to count then.
I'm counted, so going to against.
How many?
We've got 7. Okay, so then you take it.
Those against?
For the benefit of Councillor Fort, I do think we can say, it does say in there that exceptions can be made. So if somebody really thought something was that, yes, you can bring it forward.
I'd just like to say on this that obviously a lot of work has gone into this to bring out this form we have, and obviously it's as we just discovered, it's a guide. So therefore we have a guide now. Anybody comes to groups, individuals want to put a plaque somewhere in Maidstone, they know where to come, they have a guide, and they know what we're looking for. Thank you, members. If there's no other business, I'm going to declare this meeting closed. We next meet on the 30th of January, 1918.
We're getting a time machine.
Retrospective, sorry. Yes. So I'll take this opportunity to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a happy and peaceful New Year.